This will take us probably about 4 days to get through. All right, so this unit's called the political crisis of the 1850s. (1848), we're going to start with this election, the 1848 election. So we have three primary candidates, three primary parties: the Democrats, the Whigs, the Free Soil, with their candidates. We're going to go into a little bit of detail of each one in the next couple of slides. So Democrats, you have Lewis Case. The Whigs, you have Zachary Taylor. And Free Soil candidate is Martin Van Buren. So Lewis Case is a Northern Democrat. Democrats choose him because he is in the North. They're wanting to siphon off Northern votes. So he's a good choice. So for this slide, all you just need to know is that Lewis Case is a Northern Democrat. Democrats, for the most part, have control of the southern states. So but they don't have enough votes down there, so they have to use this tactic to use Northern Democrats to vote along party lines. So that's the reason they choose them. It works for Democrats for a long time. Whigs. He's a Southerner. He's also a war hero. This is very typical, not only of this party, but of almost any party. They like to choose war heroes. Americans love war heroes, and so he was a good choice for the Southerners. The same tactic that was used in the 1840 election, choose a war hero. All right, so the Free Soil candidate, Martin Van Buren, he's also a Northern Democrat. You should be going, what's a Free Soil candidate? Somebody asked me that question so I can answer you. Yes, Gunnar. What is what? Free Soil candidate? Okay. Thanks for asking. That's a good question, Gunnar. So the Free Soil Party was a very short-lived party, really a single topic issue for them, and that was the status of the new states coming into the Union. Their goal was to create all new states coming into the Union as territories become states, that they become free, that they come into the Union as free states, not slave states. That is their main and really only topic that they care about. Now, sure, there's other little stuff, but this is their main issue right here. All new states coming into the Union come in as free states. It was really only a party that had any force during these two presidential elections, 1848 and 1852. Then they split up, which we will address when we get there. So there, you might want to write down and this is kind of the definition of the Free Soil Party. I put this out for you to write. If you have to match a question or what have you, then you'll have this information. Single party issue, its main purpose to oppose the extension of slavery in the Western Territories, arguing that free men on free soil constituted a moral and economically superior system to slavery. So they are more arguing from the economic perspective that those territories and states will be better off economically with free white workers, not slavery. They're not really arguing the morality of it yet. It's based on the money system.
Hey guys, welcome to Hip Hughes History. You've been waiting for it. It's finally here. It's the election of 1848, which I could probably describe like this. You ever been in your family room if you have a pet and the dog takes a dump in the other room and everybody pretends not to smell it? That's the election of 1848. Only the dump is the issue of slavery. So let's see who our candidates are. Let's see what the campaign issues are. Let's see what the Electoral College map looks like. And let's see if we can't giddy up for the learning. Let's go get her done right now. So with James K. Polk living up to his word, which was that he was only going to run for one term, he steps down and then he dies. We have an open election. We have our Whigs, we have our Democrats, and we're going to get the bubblings of a new party, not the Republicans yet, but it's going to be called the Free Soil Party. Let's take a look at the Whigs. Now, the Whigs only had one winner previously. That was William Henry Harrison, famous general, fought the Native Americans, and then he died. So this is their second stab at it, and after running numerous candidates that failed previously, senators and legislators and such like that, they decided to go for another war hero. So they pick Louisiana slave owner Zachary Taylor, who has no political experience, and he hasn't even voted in an election. In fact, his stances on the issues were always muddled, always kind of unclear, and he was kind of a weird candidate to be a Whig. The Whig is primarily a northern party, and here is this general from the South. He is the hero of Punta Alta, of Monterey, and you have to remember that James K. Polk was a Democrat, and he launched that Mexican War. The Whigs were against the war, but now that the treaty has been signed and the United States suddenly finds itself with all of this new cool land in the Southwest, we got California and Nevada and Utah and Colorado, there's all these states, they're all coming into the Union. The Whigs start to kind of push towards acceptance that maybe this wasn't a bad thing. Now, Zachary Taylor actually fought in the Mexican War, so it's kind of ironic he's going to be the Whig candidate after fighting a Democratic war that the Whigs opposed. In fact, Zachary Taylor was courted by both political parties, but when it comes to the vice presidential nominee, his first nominee choice was actually Daniel Webster from Massachusetts, who really wanted to be president really bad, but he thought he would do a better job in Congress, so he turned it down. Psych! You should have took the job. You would have been president. But it's pretty clear Zachary Taylor is going to be the candidate, and he chooses as his vice presidential nominee. And you want to pay attention because all of the Whigs die. So the vice presidential nominees become really important. And this is going to be a Whig from my hometown of Buffalo, New York, Millard Fillmore, who's going to do an awful job as president. But there we go. We have our Whigs. The Whigs are a northern party running a slave-owning Zachary Taylor from Louisiana, and we're really going to watch them kind of dance around the issue of slavery. All right, we got one party locked up, the Whigs. Let's see who the Democrats are going to put up at the plate. Let's bring in the Democrats. Now, the Democrat that wanted the nomination is Martin Van Buren. This guy will just not go away. He is a northern Democrat. He wants to be the Democratic nominee, but he's turned away primarily because of his support for the Wilmot provision, which would have banned slavery out west with all of these new territories. That made him, in the eyes of the South, unacceptable. They end up going with Lewis Cass from Michigan, who, like many of these Democrats, are going to support the concept of popular sovereignty. He chooses for his vice presidential nominee William Orlando Butler from Kentucky, who is pretty pro-slavery, and that's going to force some of the northern Democrats to have a problem with this ticket as well. So at the end of the day, you have a Democratic Party which is based in the South running a northerner, and a Whig Party based in the North running a southerner. I'm getting confused talking about it. But like the Whigs, the Democrats are also going to try to avoid this issue of slavery, really focusing on their opposition to the national bank, their opposition to tariffs and infrastructure spending, as well as their fierce loyalty to the concept of states' rights, the Jeffersonian Republican idea. Lewis Cass was Andrew Jackson's Secretary of War. He has deep roots in the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party doesn't want to lose the North, so they're going to run a northerner with this Michiganian. Is Michiganian a word? I don't think so. But also the vice presidential nominee is from Kentucky, so they see this as a balanced ticket, and they're going to go for the win. Unfortunately, spoiler alert, so the spoiler is going to be Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren is done. He is not going to let Lewis Cass, this Democrat with his ideas of popular sovereignty, win the election. And he knows as a third-party candidate he can't win, but he's willing to throw this election to the Whig Party. So he bands together with some of the Liberty Party members like Samuel Chase and Charles Sumner from Massachusetts and other northern Democrats that are opposed to popular sovereignty, some northern Whigs as well, and they form what is now called called the Free Soil Party. They support the Wilmot Provision. They don't want slavery to expand. Martin Van Buren is fiercely opposed to popular sovereignty and what he calls the two parties' dominance of slave power. So he is literally going to split the vote in the North with the Democratic Party and throw this election to the Whigs, primarily in New York. So we have Martin Van Buren. His vice presidential nominee is none other than, drumroll, Charles Adams Sr., who is the son and grandson of two presidents. Pretty famous guy. But we are going to see some of these free soilers, like Samuel Chase of Ohio, win and go to the Senate. Charles Sumner of Massachusetts ends up going to the Senate. And what we've just done, guys, is we've planted the seeds of the Republican Party. Now, Abraham Lincoln, he's going to campaign for the Whigs, but soon enough, he's going to be pulled over to those free soilers soon, and you start to see the history of forming. All right, we have our three major candidates now, and they're all lined up, and we're going to talk about the campaign. How about that, kids? Old Rough and Ready, that's what they called Zachary Taylor, the old you-know-what. And his slogan was, without regard to principle or creed. This is a guy who really is an independent. He's probably more of a Democrat than a Whig at the end of the day. He's a unionist. He's for the National Bank. He's for protective tariffs, but he's also for states' rights and he's against infrastructure spending. He believes in the Wilmot Provision, we think, but he's willing to compromise on the issue of slavery. In fact, it'll be Millard Fillmore, his vice president, that ends up signing the Fugitive Slave Act, which pushes us to the brink of civil war. So Zachary Taylor is running very much a personality-driven campaign, negative attacks. He's really not campaigning. His surrogates are doing that, like Rutherford B. Hayes and Abraham Lincoln. Now, the Democrats and Lewis Cass, they're also avoiding this issue of slavery, trying to hold this coalition of Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats together. They're for popular sovereignty. You have to remember, it was the Democratic Party. It's really theirs to lose. James K. Polk, even though you might not know his name very well, was very successful in terms of what he set out to do. His domestic policy, and I guess his foreign policy, was to annex Texas. That started a war with Mexico. We gobbled up lots of land because of that, and the Democrats are responsible for that. However, he is not going to run, so they're stuck with this Lewis Cass, who's less of a well-known name. He's from Michigan, and he's trying to appeal to Southern Democrats, and at the same time, you have Northern Democrats that are very turned off by a pro-slavery vice presidential nominee from Kentucky. So that's the campaign, and of course, we have that spoiler in Martin Van Buren. He's running a campaign in the North only. He's not even on the ballot in every state across the country. There's no way he can win this thing, but he's pounding the pavement, talking about slave power, his opposition to popular sovereignty, and the idea that we can't have slavery expand. So there we go, guys. Let's put up the big electoral map that you love to stare at all day, and let's see if we can figure out why Zachary Taylor is going to be the second and the last elected Whig president. The Whigs did a smarty picking a Southerner because it counts where you're from. You can see from the electoral map there that Zachary Taylor is going to win not only northern states, but southern states as well. At the end of the day, he racks up 163 electoral votes, Lewis Cass 127 electoral votes, and Martin Van Buren doesn't win any electoral votes. Now, the popular vote was really close. Zachary Taylor won the popular vote with about 47% of the vote to 42.5% for Lewis Cass, but 10% of the popular vote went to Martin Van Buren. And at the end of the day, if Martin Van Buren doesn't run those 36 electoral votes in New York, they go to Lewis Cass, and he's the next president of the United States. So Martin Van Buren got his wish. He was a spoiler, and he threw it to the Whigs. Now, we know what happened. Zachary Taylor, like all Whig presidents, Zachary Taylor is going to die, and he's not going to be successful in accomplishing what he wanted to accomplish in solving this problem of slavery and these new southwestern states coming into the Union. That's going to be put into the lap of Millard Fillmore, and he's only going to be around for about 3 years, and then we're going to get rid of him as well. Out of here, Millard Fillmore, go back to Buffalo. You know nothing. It's an inside joke. All right, guys, we hope you understand something about the 1848 election.
All right. Gives you the overview of the election. We know a few spoilers in our own lifetime. Ross Perot. Some people even argue Jill Steiner, the Green Party, threw the election for Hillary. If you look at how many votes went to her, Some people argue that that might have been enough to knock 1 or 2 states over back into Hillary Clinton's campaign. So, but same thing with Rand Paul or Ron Paul when they would run as libertarians. Gary Johnson is another one. They siphon off votes off the Republican ticket. All right, so here's a term you need to know. It will be on the test. If you're in any other history class, you will need to know this term. This is an incredibly important term for you to know, popular sovereignty. So you should already have an idea of what the second word means, sovereignty. Where is all control rested? Among the people, typically in our Constitution, it says all control rest with the states or the people if the Constitution does not say otherwise. So popular sovereignty, you already have an idea of what it might be referring to. But in our case, in the way it was termed in this time period, it is referencing to how is the condition, the status of the new state going to be decided? Daniel Webster, among others, said, let it be through popular sovereignty. Let the people decide. Put it up to vote. If they want to have a free state, they can vote that way. If they want to have a slave state, let them vote that way. So Case and Stephen Douglas, an individual you will get to know very soon, and you should know in American history, was very supportive of popular sovereignty. Let the people in the territory decide whether it be free or slave. Is this going to be on the test? Oh, yes. All right. There is a problem with popular sovereignty, particularly for the Southern perspective. They argue that it ignores the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. While they make this argument, they do support it, at least for now. They do see it as a possible compromise. They might be able to later down the road work something out. Because at least through popular sovereignty, they do have an option through the vote to have something a slave state. All they got to do is have more of those who support slavery than there are that aren't vote. But their argument against this ideal is that it violates the Fifth Amendment. What is the Fifth Amendment? Anybody recall? You might want to know this because it still applies to you today. Let's see what the exact verbiage is. I don't even want to paraphrase this one. Fifth Amendment, no person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise infamous crimes unless on a presentment of or indictment of a grand jury, except in the cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia where the actual service of time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject to, excuse me, I can't hardly see that. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. In other words, they can't be tried twice. Nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. That's where you plead the Fifth. When somebody says, I plead the Fifth, or they invoke the Fifth Amendment. What's that? You've said that? Yeah, a police officer asks you questions. If we ask you questions here, you don't have to answer. You, as even though you're underage, do have a Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate yourself. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to get suspended and be sent home, but you do not have to. You don't have to incriminate against yourself. Nor be derived of life, liberty, or property without due process. That's what they're saying this violates. Because now what if I'm in a state that slavery is legal, I want to move and go to a new territory, and that is no longer legal. It's not legal in that state. I now am being deprived of my property without due process on top of that. That's the argument. Now, I'm going to hold off, and I'll just let you know it does go to court, but I'll hold off on the verdict. That's the portion. There's like four provisions in the Fifth Amendment, and it's that particular clause that they're arguing. You might want to write this down, by the way, so that you know what part of the Fifth Amendment is the issue. It's depriving of property without due process. Remember, slaves are property. And under our law, you cannot lose your property without due process. All right, so we need to talk a little bit about the Mexican secession. As you'll notice here, here's Idaho. Mexico came all the way up to the border of Idaho and Oregon at one time. Now, originally, we had asked for the land and offered to pay for it. Mexico said, no, thank you. We'll keep it. Polk kept pushing and pushing, and many historians believe President Polk and some of his military folks instigated a war with Mexico. Because all through history, if you have a war, those who win get to take the spoils of war. Whatever territory they get to decide whether they want to keep it or not. Almost always, they keep at least keep the good stuff. After we went all the way to Mexico City and defeated Mexico, we being the United States, they gave it all the way back, gave all that land back up to the Rio Grande and up to this, basically our current border. Then our government paid for the rest of the land. They didn't get as much as we originally offered, but paid some odd millions of dollars for the rest of this land. So I know there are some out there that argue that America stole it from Mexico and blah, that isn't really what happened. Yes, a war was provoked, most historians believe, for the purpose of securing this land. There is some strong argument for that. But a war nonetheless did occur, and Mexico got most of its land back, all the way up to the border, and then we paid for this, we being the United States. Yeah.
Why did we go ahead and take Mexico?
So a lot of people said we should have. But we didn't have any interest in that. We really wanted the route to California. But a lot of people said we should have. And then there's the sociological argument, would have they been better off financially, those people living there? That's the other argument, is that they would have been, because then if you look at how is the economy in New Mexico, Arizona, California, well, ideally it would have been this, they would have been just as good as up here as they are all the way down, because it would have been part of America. We don't know. The what ifs is always interesting to explore, but there are people that do think, including back then, we should have not given it back. They lost. We should have, the old conquering mentality, and then there's others today that said they would have been better off. The Mexican people would have been better off finding our union and enjoying our economy. So, and it's hard to deny that, because look how many people end up in body bags down there. So, it's the what ifs. We don't know, but this is definitely a controversial act in terms of not this secession, but the Mexican-American War. I do lean towards my understanding of reading what I've read, that we, the United States government, did push Mexico into a war for the purpose of stomping them and taking what we wanted. Now, the flip side is, if that was true, then why did we even pay the money? See, it's kind of mind-boggling to think. We didn't have to do it, but we. So, could it be as a way to cover up the real intent? How we got into the, how a war started? I don't know. I don't know that we'll ever know. But it's something to consider. Why did we pay all that money? We didn't have to. So, but we did through our taxes. But that's how this part of the United States become the United States? It's through the Mexican-American War. So 1848, Mexico officially succeeds this part of the land to the United States. So the question is now, they've got all of these new territories. Are they going to be free or are they going to be slave? This is the question of the decade. Under popular sovereignty, those who support that, they want those living in these territories to make the decision. The North is banking on that all these immigrants in the North is going to move out west for this free land, and they're going to bring Northern principles with them, being anti-slavery. The South is banking on moving Southerners out there, and it's really a race to who can get more out there on the day of voting. Because that's at the end of the day, that's what matters. Can we get more voters in support of slavery, or can we get more voters out there who's in support of free? That's what's happening here. So we have two different provisions written. The Wilmot Proviso is the first one that is written. The second is the Calhoun Resolutions. These two provisions really outline the struggle that is now starting to raise its ugly head. It's always been in our society, even during our early founding, this issue of slavery. But it's finally coming up to a boil. In the next couple of slides, we're going to go into the detail of these two provisions. All right, so in essence, the Wilmot Proviso, it's a law that is proposed by David Wilmot. You don't really need to know him, just understand it's the last name. That's usually how a lot of these laws are named. To ban slavery in the territories that was acquired through the Mexican War. So this particular provision would outlaw slavery completely in the new territories. This sparked really the first sectarian or sectional divide in Congress. If you think about San Andreas Fault, it's all covered up in dirt. You don't see it until all of a sudden something happens and it shifts to such a degree that you get your first recognizable crack. That's one way to look at this. Now this law passes the House, but it does not get through the Senate. So it never becomes a law. It always remains as a bill. But why this is important is because it exposes the crack in the Union. It exposes really people's true feelings, and it really brought things to a head. If you think about shaking up a Coke bottle, okay? When you first crack that open, what happens? Boom, right? That's kind of the way to think about this. That Coke bottle looked normal sitting there on your desk until you open it, or until you drop it off your desk, and then you pick it up and you open it, huh? Yeah. Okay, the second piece of legislation that is drafted a year later is the Calhoun Resolutions. Now it's actually quite long. I paraphrase basically just a few key points here. The Southern perspective, particularly led by Senator Calhoun, John Caldwell Calhoun, the U.S. territory is common property of the United States. All states have equal access to that territory. The only constitutional requirement for statehood was a Republican form of government. So any other regulations placed on those territories, he says, is unconstitutional. In that federal territories are open to all states to benefit from. It is not until they become a state do they have before they leave federal jurisdiction. And this term, common property, is a term we use today. When you're married and you buy a house, that house is common property. Husband and wife equally owns it. So let's say, for example, you have a divorce and you want your husband to leave. You can't make him leave. He owns that house equally. If you deprive him of that, say change the locks, you can actually be charged. There is some discrepancy. Some judges do hold that. Idaho does not have a common law, but some judges do recognize that. But let's say you're living together, boyfriend, girlfriend, and you pay rent equally. Or you rent together. Say you're both on the rent agreement. Your boyfriend, who now is ex-boyfriend, you can't stand his guts, you can't make him leave. Now, let's say he puts you in danger, okay, and you get a restraining order. That's different. That's a different situation. But you do have everything you buy as husband and wife as common property. I had to go, even though I bought the Honda, now in Washington State it's a little different, and I'm really talking in Idaho. So last week I had to go get my wife's name on my car title so she can get her handicap plates. Okay, in Washington State I didn't have to do that, but in Idaho I did need to do that because it's common property. Casey, if you can come in at lunch, I'll print off the slides that you missed. Same thing with the rest of you who've missed anything. I'll print off the slides that you've missed. All right. Calhoun warns if the balance between the North and South were destroyed, in other words, the balance regarding votes, not only electoral votes for the president, but in the Congress. Remember, Congress, the Senate is decided by one senator per state, right? Oh, excuse me, two senators. Two senators per state. But House of Representatives is based on state population. So he's warning, if this does not stay balanced, political revolution, civil war, and widespread disaster would occur. Because the South understands what the North is trying to do. They're trying to stack the deck regarding representatives in the House, Senate, and the Electoral College. If they can get enough votes, they can outlaw slavery. Now, the South in itself don't really care about slaves, other than their entire economy has been based on it. Their very survival depends on it. Now, you're going to see in this video we're going to play here where Calhoun gives a warning a few years before. He's having dinner with the president and another individual from the North. I can't remember his name right now. I think they do say it in the video. He has a dinner, they're having dinner with the ambassador of Spain, and Calhoun warns them. First of all, the North has established the economic system in the South. They have encouraged slavery. And now they're turning around trying to remove slavery and therefore destroying the Southern economy, making the Southern people slaves themselves. So we're going to watch this video real quick here. I think it really lays, especially if you watch the body language of where he understood things were going and where the Northerner was shocked. Remember, Calhoun is seen as an absolute radical, and he's shocked at what he says. He says this, I think, in 1841, long before.
What's most bewildering to Her Majesty is this arrogant independence of the American courts. After all, if you cannot rule the courts, you cannot rule.
Senor Calderon, as any true American will
He's
tell
the
you,
president.
it's the independence
I'm
of
not
our
sure
courts
which
that keeps
one,
us free.
1841, whichever that is. It's Calhoun.
John. Mr. President. Senator Calhoun.
The guy right there is the president. The other guy was
I
the
was afraid
ambassador.
you weren't going to be able
The
to
guy
join
sitting
us.
there.
You may put that fear to rest, Mr.
Oh,
President.
thank you. Please.
I'd like you to meet Senor Calderon, ambassador from Spain.
Buenos noches, your ambassador.
Some other people.
I thought you said he wasn't coming. He said he wasn't.
You see, Senor Calderon, there's a growing number of people in this part of the country that regard us in the South as not only geographically beneath them. They ignore the fact that slavery is so interwoven into the fabric of this society that to destroy it would be to destroy us as a people. It's immoral. That's all they know. Therefore, so are we. Immoral and inferior. We are inferior in one area. We're not as proficient in the art of gain. We're not as wealthy as our northern neighbors. We're still struggling. Take away our life's blood now. Well, we all know what happens then, north and south. They become the masters, and we the slaves. But not without a fight.
Senator Calhoun is being modest. He's not inferior in another area, the art of exaggeration.
Ask yourself, Senor Calderon, what court wants to be responsible for the spark that ignites the firestorm? What president wants to be in office when it comes crashing down around him? Certainly no court before this one. Certainly no president before this one. So, judge us not too harshly, sir, and bid Her Majesty like. Because the real determination our courts and our president must make is not whether this ragtag group of Africans raise swords against their enemy, but rather, must we?
Was he really talking to the ambassador? Was he sending that communication to the ambassador? Who was he talking to there? Yeah. He was sending a warning to the president and the other northerners there. All right. We're talking about the Compromise of 1850. So just a quick introduction here. President Taylor opposes any congressional action on the slavery question. He does support the admission of California as a free state. So the Compromise of 1850, I don't quite go into probably enough detail here, so write this down. Compromise of 1850 is there'd be 1 for 1. For every state that comes in free, the next one would have to be slave. Starting with California being free. He does support that, but he dies while he's in office. Fillmore, Vice President Fillmore, Hip Hughes' buddy there from his hometown, takes over. He supports the same thing, but he's ineffective. And over this compromise, the South begins talking succession. This is 10, 11 years before they do it. So the Compromise of 1850, 1 for 1. I will probably ask you, explain the Compromise of 1850. For every free state's admitted, there has to be a slave state, and they come in at the same time. And what's the purpose of this? What are they trying to do, especially the South? Say again? Balance. They're trying to keep the electoral college and the votes in the Congress balanced. If you let 2 free states in, because coming into this whole time period, it's about 50-50. Okay, give or take. If you let 2 or 3 free states in, you're no longer balanced, and the South will always be the minority. So Henry Clay comes up with an ideal that he thinks might work for a compromise. California comes in as a free state. No slave trading in Washington, D.C. Popular sovereignty in Utah and New Mexico territories. So far, the South really haven't got anything yet. He's hoping having a stronger fugitive slave law, which is something the South wants, will be enough to appease the South. So what this means is, let's say a runaway slave gets to California. Is he free? No. The fugitive law says the government of California has to send him back. Have to assist the bounty hunters. Have to, if the owner comes and gets him, has to assist. They could be charged for not following the law. You'd have to be born in California. If you start out as a slave and you get to California illegally, you're still a slave. See, it used to be if you got to a free state and you didn't get caught, you could stay there. If you did get caught, if the sheriff or law enforcement in that area was anti-slavery, they may not allow you to be taken into custody and taken back. They actually might bring their force in and tell the owner you're not taking them back. Others would assist. There's always bounties on these guys, so a lot of times the sheriff, oh, this guy's a runaway, great, pay me $10, I'll go get him for you. That happened a lot too. So how the Compromise of 1850 looks on a map. Got your slave states down in the bottom in orange. All the northern territories and states are free. And then you see the 4 territories that remain in popular sovereignty. These guys right here. And then the Oklahoma Territory, which, by the way, was supposed to be reserved for Indians. It's called the Indian Territory. Now they're calling it, getting ready to call it the Oklahoma Territory. Okay. So, at one time, by the way, Texas claimed all of this as Texas. And then it got carved down. You can see the border here. And then finally, Texas, okay, fine. You can have this piece too. So, remember, Texas was an independent country at one time. They broke away from Mexico. 7 years later, they, because of all their debt, they sold their debt to the United States in exchange to coming into the Union. So, they still claim to be able to withdraw from the Union anytime they want, and they did during the Civil War. And, huh? They had the Union flag, and they had their state flag like every other state. Daniel Webster of Massachusetts supports the compromise. So if I ask you, who supports the Compromise of 1850? Daniel Webster. I would think so. Why is that, Aaron? That's right. Noah Webster is the one that wrote the first dictionary. I have 2 copies. One of them's here, one's at home. 1824. And then his family took over after he was long gone. And it's interesting. I used the definition of education compared to Noah Webster's 1824 definition to today's definition in Webster's dictionary, and it's incredibly different. I wrote a paper on that issue just this last week in my college class. Almost, you can't even really tell that it's the same definition. It's like, really? It is so far different compared to how our founding fathers saw education. All right, of course, John C. Calhoun opposes it. He believed the only way to preserve the Union is to give South equal access to all the territories. So leading up to this, there's been this thought by the Southerners that perhaps the Northerners, the abolitionists, is operating off of maybe a different law, a different philosophy. Because remember, we have the Declaration of Independence, and then we have the Constitution. The Constitution is very clear on what Congress can and cannot do. It leaves almost all authority to the states or the individual people within the states. And the Constitution is supposed to be, as it was sold to them, the highest law in the land. Anthony, hoodie, all the way down. Come on. And so they've got this sense that the North is operating on a different law, if you will, different code. They're not on the same page. And it all came crashing down in realization that they're correct. When William Seward gave a speech called the Higher Law Speech, where he states there is something higher than the Constitution we must follow. He didn't say what it was, but he admits there is something that we're operating on something completely different, and you don't know what it is. It is absolutely shocking to the Southerners. Now they know that no matter what they do, they're not playing by the same rules. They're arguing, for example, against the popular sovereignty because it violates the Constitution. Now they find out it doesn't matter because the North is not operating off the Constitution. This is another huge crack. It expands that divide even further. This actually does bother even Northerners. The radicals on both parties, both sides of the spectrum, are actually defeated at the next election because of it, in part because of it. It'd be almost like in our elections, the radicals on both sides not being elected because they're so I don't want to say so loud, that might be part of it, but because they're so on the fringe that people settle for more people towards the middle. Does that make sense? Okay, there's a lot of, especially at the local elections. But this higher law speech, and I highlight it, we're not going to read it, but I would encourage you if you ever get a chance to do so. And think of it from a Southerner perspective who is operating off of the Constitution. And now they find out they're not even using it. Okay, so yeah, I've already covered this. It is the most important speech William Seward gives. The U.S. Constitution was not the highest law in America. And this is the first time the Southerners hear this. Most Southerners, what we call Southerners back then, were Jeffersonians. They were small federal government. They were what's called anti-federalists. They didn't trust the Constitution and they didn't trust the Federalists. They thought it would made the federal government too strong. And the very things that they argued in the Anti-Federalist Papers is now coming true right before their eyes. The Southern culture really has developed a strong state sovereignty platform, self-determination, what is shortened for states' rights. What's interesting is you're going to see this boil up. It's going to be destroyed with the Civil War and then finished off with the 16th Amendment in 1917. But you're seeing it come back. What's interesting, it's coming back not from conservative states, but from liberal states, Oregon, Washington, California, under the guise of legalization of marijuana. They're arguing the very same thing the South did. We have the right to control our own destiny, and one of those things we have a right to decide is whether we use marijuana legally or not. So, we haven't quite got a clear split in the North yet. We do have Northern resistance to the Compromise of 1850. Because they got, well, I should say, there's many of them that don't like it either for different reasons. One of the ways they helped undermine the Compromise of 1850 was increase personal liberty laws, which counteracted the fugitive slave laws. And you see that here, Northern states agreed to, they refused to agree to these laws, and they used nullification by not enforcing the fugitive slave law. The Southerners argued that's unconstitutional. If Congress passes a law, then you have to abide by it. The South sees this as a continued, and the phrase will be coined, Northern aggression on the South. In fact, those in the South don't call it the Civil War, they call it the War of the Northern Aggression. Ask Mr. Abel what he calls the Civil War, being from Virginia. He might even say, what Civil War? If it doesn't scream today's Congress to you, I don't know what else would. No matter what is proposed as a compromise, there's enough people who out there to destroy it that they can't get anything done. If you ever hear the word Congress is in deadlock, that's why. Every compromise that is presented, from both sides of the aisle, there just isn't enough people who will go with it. All right, any questions at this point? Anything that needs clarification? Anything I wasn't clear on? Questions you might have? Why did they do this or do that? Sit down, Anthony. We're not going anywhere.